Well, we will get it going. We still got some people dropping into the uh, attendees here, but thanks to those of you guys that were here at the half hour. It's being recorded, so anybody can go back and, of course, catch the recording if they jump on late. But we want to make sure we cover as much as possible, so we'll jump in. So, first of all, Alex, Darren, thanks for jumping on. We appreciate you guys. We're really excited. I'm particularly excited for this topic, like I was just saying a second ago, because I think today it's a small panel with just Darren and Alex. So I think we're going to be able to go deep on this topic, but they're both really knowledgeable and educated in this topic of mitigating seasonal fluctuations and seasonality in a performance business, which is a topic that I probably have 3 conversations about a day, right? Like literally just talking with performance business owners across the space that are, thinking about becoming speed labs or thinking about just growing the business. Like this is a topic that consistently comes up, especially this time of year. Like we just got through back to school season, which is usually the biggest seasonal fluctuation that a performance business experiences. So I think this is a good top of mind topic. And I think that it's really important. Like in my 10 years of working with training businesses, like I think this is one of the most important topics in terms of just making the business as successful as it can possibly be. Right. So some quick introductions here for 2 people that I think need no introduction, but some attendees might be new to these spaces. So first of all, we've got Darren Hansen, who's the owner of HansenAthletics. Darren has also been with us as a speed lab for, how long have you been a speed lab, Darren? Like 2.5 years?
Day one. So I think it was end of
Yeah.
2021.
Yeah. So Darren took early. He was like our very first speed lab partner and has done a lot to help us just develop what we're doing with the speed lab partnership. And so he is one of our speed lab directors, and he's out of Pocatello, Idaho. Darren, want to give a fun fact about yourself?
Oh man, fun fact. My flag football team is undefeated this season. Still play flag at 32.
Flag football team that you're coaching, your flag football team.
My team, yeah. I play. Yeah.
Let's go. What position are you in?
Like a middle linebacker and slot.
All right. Okay, I like it. Cool. And then we've also got Alex Gibson on the call, owner of APG Strength out in Hendersonville in the Nashville area, and is also a speed lab director for us for our Southwest region. So Alex, grateful to have you on the call, and I know you're going to bring some good content and just knowledge to the conversation. Want to give one fun fact about yourself or APG?
Oh man, I'm 4'11". I'm like
4'11".
athlete at my school.
4'11" and crushing it. And when did APG open? How long have you guys been in business?
We opened in the summer of 2021.
Okay, cool, sweet. So probably on par with a good amount of people in the attendees here.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we will dive into our topic. So, thanks again for coming to the webinar today. I'm going to unshare my screen to make it a little bit easier to see our panelists, and also just to set the agenda and setting for the webinar here today. We like these webinars to really be almost like the attendees are able to, witness and contribute to a conversation that would be happening, Darren, between you and Alex. Like if you guys were getting together, just sharing strategies with each other on, hey, what are you doing to mitigate seasonal fluctuations in the business and keep revenue consistent? Like what would that conversation look like between you guys? And so the format here is I'm going to get things started with a couple of questions to kind of guide the conversation. But really, we want the conversation to be driven by the attendees. So if you're an attendee here on the webinar, please, as early as right now, you can start dropping questions in the chat on the topic of seasonal fluctuation and what Alex and Darren are doing to help smooth that out in their business. So if you've got questions on anything related to that topic, feel free to start dropping them in the chat. We'll get started and then we'll dive into attendee questions. So just to set the stage here, there's a couple of things that I think are big picture important when it comes to mitigating these seasonal fluctuations. I think the first thing is when I talk to performance business owners, they're typically on one side or the other. Like they're either overly confident and cocky coming into like back to school season where they're like not thinking about the seasonal drop off at all. And they're just like, we're not going to lose any athletes, right? Like we get great results for our clients. And so we're not going to lose anybody. And then they kind of get, a dose of reality when that comes. And then I talk to people that are on the far other end of the spectrum that I feel like kind of just lay down, right? Like they're like, yeah, it's just the way it is. Like, we lose all our athletes and or 75% of our athletes and 75% of our revenue every year at this time. And there's just nothing that can be done about it. Right. And I think that the correct position that I've seen over the years is to be somewhere in between those two, right? To not be cocky and overly confident, like know that the business is going to have busier seasons and slower seasons and that there is going to be some seasonal fluctuation, but also like don't just lay down, right? Don't just accept that it's like, oh, we're going to lose all this business this time of year. Start thinking about other strategies to help mitigate that, which is really what today is about. And I think the underlying theme under all of this that I've talked with performance business owners about for years is really just proactivity, right? It's just like getting out in front of it, thinking about this stuff, as unpleasant as it can be to think about. Like I think about back to school season for a performance business as being equivalent to tax season for the average person. It's like we know it's coming every year, but we just don't want to think about it. And then April comes and we're like, oh man, like this again, right? Even though we knew it was coming. And so even though it can be a little bit unpleasant to think about, seasonal fluctuations in the business, I feel like the businesses that win here are the ones who are being proactive and getting ahead of it, not just accepting, hey, we're going to lose all this business and there's nothing we can do about it. So I know that we talked a little bit before the call, and Alex and Darren, you put your head together and kind of highlighted a couple of specific areas that you focus in to mitigate that seasonality. And so, Darren, maybe we'll start with you. If you can riff off the top of your head, what are those 4 areas that you like to focus in to help mitigate some of the seasonal fluctuation?
Yeah, I think like he said, historically fall. I mean, we've been open long enough that we know it's coming, and it's like, what can we do preemptively? I think is really important. So, the 4 buckets that I would say we focus on is number 1, year-round education on in-season training through our platforms, through our conversation with the athletes, through our coaches' education and teaching our coaches to have the conversations with the athletes. Second bucket's going to be building that relationship, not only with the athlete, but with the parents, with different medical professionals in your area that can become lead sources for you, for those athletes that unfortunately, have injuries in season or have pain. And then, like I said, the athlete conversations, I kind of hit at that. We can go a little bit deeper into that as we go through, but teaching those athletes the benefits throughout the year. And then also a new client bucket. So, what sports aren't in fall, how do we target them? And even thinking outside of traditional sports, like we have cheerleaders in here right now, we have swimmers, we have lacrosse, we have dancers, and we are about to have a homeschooling group start. So there's a lot of different ways, right? So those are kind of the 4 buckets that we focus on.
Yeah. So just to recap, I heard a couple of things there. One, obviously a focus on new athletes, right? Acquiring new athletes into the business to replace some of the ones that are leaving and going into season, right?
Yep.
And I think you hit on something really important there, which is thinking about getting outside of the kind of lanes or pockets of athletes that you would normally train, right? Like Darren, I know we were talking like a month ago, and I think you mentioned you were training a cheer squad. You just mentioned a swim team, right? And so like you're really branching out into groups of athletes that I think a lot of performance businesses don't think about and kind of overlook. So I think
100%.
important is focus on what athletes are out of season right now that we could be bringing into the business when things like football go into season. Obviously, retaining your current athletes, having relationships with other organizations and businesses in the area, and then obviously just that educating athletes and parents about the importance of continuing to train in season. So those were kind of the 4 things that I heard there. Alex, would you agree with those things? Is there anything you would add to that in terms of strategies that you guys have implemented in the business? And then I want to get into kind of the specific tactics around those strategies, like what implementing those actually looks like.
Yeah, 100% agree with all those things. And we have a very similar approach. I think for us, just an additional piece is trying to get in with some of the teams that are in season. Like we were working with a soccer team right now that we do some of their in-season speed stuff. And like softball's about to kick up, but they all start training like in October. And so trying to get some of those teams on board for our team training has helped for us. And then the second thing, just reiterating the relationship with the parent. And we'll talk about going to games and things like that in a minute, but I think that's really huge to make sure they understand why it's important. If you're trying to keep some of your kids in the door for in-season training, like explaining the injury risk piece to that if they step away from training for like 3 months.
Yeah, leaning into that injury prevention, I think, is huge. And again, to the attendees here, feel free to start dropping questions in the Q&A. I'm going to start going a little bit deeper on this topic, but if you have questions that come to mind as Alex and Darren chime in here, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll answer them.
And I'll
So,
add one thing to that too, is making sure you understand the metrics. Like a lot of people will, even for us, at times we've like kind of like have a freak out moment of like, wow, like look at our numbers, they're down, whatever. I think you just have to expect it with your in-season kids because this is what you're training them for. Like you have to remember that you're preparing them for this in-season time. And so just keeping that in mind when maybe they're not coming as much or they have to go on pause, um, is just like part of the game, if that makes sense. But it can help if you look, what does August and September look like last year, year before? How does it look now? And then you can look at those metrics and make sure you're just still moving in an upward trajectory of the clients that you're retaining during the fall season.
yeah, right. Having that. So you're always going to have busier months and slower months, but just making sure that your slower months are getting less slow year over year. I think that's a great point, is like, that's really something that we should be paying attention to. And I think it taps into a bigger point, which is something that I've preached for years. And I feel like the best performance business owners do, which is, and this is so simple, but it's actually go do the math, right? Like actually go look at the numbers. Like don't just guess as you're coming in. Like, based on the athletes that you're training and the populations that you're tapped into in your marketplace as a performance business owner, like when these seasonal fluctuations are going to be. So again, it goes back to proactivity. Like, they're coming. And I feel like the step that I see a lot of performance business owners kind of overlook is that they kind of just take a shot in the dark of like what their plan needs to be to actually, because the goal here at the end of the day is to try to keep revenue as consistent as possible, right? It's not even necessarily to keep the number of athletes you're training as consistent as possible. It's to keep revenue as consistent as possible. And so I think actually look at the numbers, right? Look at what you did last year, look at what your decreases were coming into August, September, or other times of year where you tend to see these fluctuations. So you know what to expect. And then you have a benchmark of like, okay, how do we improve on that over last year, right? But I think a lot of coaches that I talk to, they don't take that step of actually going and looking at the numbers, right? And at the end of the day, I think it is just a numbers problem. Like there is a solution, right? And it starts with just knowing what the numbers are. Darren, anything that you add there?
No, I think I agree with that. We do that. We track that. Our first 3 or 4 years in business, we didn't. In the last 4 years, we have. And yeah, moving the needle in the right direction keeps you confident, as well as if you can track that and see that even though you're having a little bit of a slower period, you're trending in the right direction, and that can help motivate you to do some of these things that, are going to take some extra time that we're about to talk about as we go a little bit deeper on these.
Yeah, 100%. That was actually going to be one of my follow-up questions for both of you is, how many years in a row did you have to go through that cycle of feeling blindsided by these seasonal fluctuations in training athletes before you finally like got proactive about it, before you finally started to catch on and be like, okay, this is something that we just need to plan for and we need to be active about mitigating. And so Darren, it sounds like first couple of years for you, maybe you kind of just went through that cycle before you're like, okay, we need to actually do something here. We need to have a plan in place.
Yeah. And it's also for us, like I'd recommend doing it early. It was just, when you have a smaller client base, when you're first starting up, the number drops don't seem as like, you're like, oh, that's okay. Right. But as your numbers start to scale up, and then you have drops and you can see pretty clearly a huge difference. Then you're like, oh crap, so the earlier you can get on that trend and putting these things into place, the better, because the bigger you get, the more money you make, but also usually the bigger swings you have if you're not keeping up with this stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, cool. So I want to dive a little bit deeper on one of the topics that you brought up first, which is the education piece, right? Like just getting out in front of these conversations with athletes and parents about why an athlete should continue to train with you, even though they're in season and they're getting, they're probably getting in the weight room at the school, so on and so forth. Obviously, time is more constrained, like why they should go through the trouble of continuing to train with you guys. And really what I want to dive into is, do you have specific processes in your business for having those conversations? Like, are you, July 1 going like, okay, it's time to start calling every parent of every athlete we train and try to set up like a 10-minute conversation to make a plan for when back to school season comes? Or is it more casual than that? Like just a little bit more of what that looks like and how you're having those conversations. And Alex, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always trying to learn how we can do it better, you know, like anything else in the business. But I definitely think those conversations need to start in July. If you wait until August, mid-August, like it's too late. And sometimes you can have these conversations, and sometimes that there's legitimately not time because like volleyball is a good example. They have so many games, unless they're coming in the morning, it's like really hard to convince that parent. But I think he starts with casual conversations with the kids. We'll even try to have those conversations if we have somebody sign up in the summertime, and I know like if they're starting mid June and their season is in August. I try to have that conversation on the front end of in season training, like, hey, we're going to be realistic with where we can take your athlete from point A to point B. I know the season's coming up. When we hit the season time, this is what we recommend. So they hear it then, they're going to have to hear it again, right? So tell the kid. We try to communicate that in our email communications out as the summer starts. Sorry, my dog just ran in my office. We try to have those communications leading up to August, even with like articles that we send out. And if somebody does reach out, like, hey, I'm looking, we're about to start season, we need to put so and so on pause. Then I say, well, hey, do you know we have a 1 day a week membership option? When they come in during season, their workout's going to look a little different. We'll have a recovery protocol for them, or we're making sure we're just filling the buckets that they're not getting in practice. And then I would say also social media, or if you do a podcast, start to put that stuff out early.
Yeah, 100%. I think regardless of how defined the actual processes of having those conversations, and I'm glad to hear that you agree that those conversations really need to start in July. Like when going back again, and I'm going to keep harping on this, is like the proactivity piece, right? Is like if you're on the back foot, if you're trying to save and retain these clients once you're already getting the call saying, hey, we need to go on hold or we need to cancel because we're going back in season, like it's too late, right? Like they've already prioritized other things. They've already, and so like the message here is be first, right? Like before they really start thinking about what that schedule is going to look like once the kids go back to school, get in that schedule, right? Get in their brain is something that they need to have in that schedule. Otherwise, something else is going to take priority over it, right? And so you got to be first. And I think a lot of, and this is something that I think performance businesses have taken from like the traditional big box gym space, right? Is like this idea of like, well, if I call them and say, hey, what's the plan for when you go back to school? They might say, oh, I've been meaning to tell you we need to cancel, right? Or we need to go on hold. And so they're kind of afraid to pick up that phone and have that conversation, right? I don't think that game theory makes sense. I think you miss 100% of shots you don't take, right? If you make that call and they say, yeah, we actually been meaning to tell you we need to, go on hold, back to school's coming, they were going to do it anyway. And so you might as well set yourself up with the opportunity to be able to make a plan with that parent, make that save. Like you'd be amazed how many athletes go on hold or cancel when they go back to school, or the parents of those athletes want to go on hold for their athlete because they just don't know that there's other options. Like they just think, oh, we're going back into season, into school, so like this is just what we do. We go on hold with the facility that we're training at. And a lot of the time when you just put it on their radar that it's like, hey, we actually have in-season programming. We have programming that is designed and a level of service that is designed to be able to keep you training while you're in season that's going to be effective for you. They're like, oh, we just didn't even know that. So like sometimes they're just not even aware of the options, right? Darren, what does your process look like for communicating that message to parents and athletes?
Yeah, a lot along those lines. I mean, we use our CRM platform to consistently send out text and email messages. So we stay on top of that. We have a podcast, a blog, the posts we put up, articles we share with our follower base. All those are always sprinkled in actually all year round with in-season stuff, because if you train athletes right now, like it's very muddied on what's in season and out season, like, or out of season. Like fall sports are very clear, but you have athletes playing multiple sports on multiple club teams at the same time. And I would argue like 60% of athletes are in season all year round. So we're having those conversations. We're having a conversation with their sport coaches about what we are doing in here. So it's very clear to them, we are taking into account what they have going on outside of the gym. Those conversations are also with parents. You need to build that trust that you're not just forcing the athlete into what you want to do, but you're listening and matching what they need at the time with what sports they're doing. And then that also is a conversation that happens with the athletes in here. And we demonstrate that through action. Like when athletes come in and they're a little bit beat up, they're a little bit sore, their energy is down, like you can see it pretty quickly as a coach. And it's like, build that trust with them by modifying that plan. Like make that workout that day, allow them to walk out feeling better. And then over time, you'll have that trust of the athlete. Cause I think a lot of times athletes will cancel in season because they're feeling pretty beat up. And there's just not necessarily that level of trust of like, if I go, is this just going to add to this load? Are they going to make me do everything that everyone else is doing? Whatnot. So I think it's good to have a plan with our training. We always have a plan, but our coaches make decisions on the fly to build that trust with athletes, and change stuff for them. So when it does come into that middle of that season, when people are pretty beat up, particularly football, where you're very physical. Am I going to walk out of that place feeling better and feeling like I'm making progress towards my performance goals?
Yeah, 100%. And this is where I think, you know, speed training specifically, I think opens up some unique opportunities for a performance business that, like more strength and conditioning, getting in the weight room focused training doesn't necessarily, right? Because I think about like one of the reasons that athletes would go on hold when they're in season is because they're getting in the weight room at school, right? And so they don't want to overtrain. They don't feel like it's necessary to be in the weight room more than they already are. But what a lot of these athletes aren't getting through the schools, they're not getting that speed training, right? And so I think this is an area where being speed focused and being an authority for speed training in your marketplace really opens up some doors and opportunities for athlete retention year round or closer to year round, um, than if you're more known or more focused on the strength and conditioning side of things for athletes, right? And so do you guys find that? I guess that leads into the question of, do you have specific levels of service for when athletes are in season that are different from when they're out of season? Like, do you have different offerings, like a 2-day a week option or a speed training only focused option or anything like that? Like, what does that look like in the business? Alex, will
Yeah.
start.
Oh, go ahead.
Uh, yeah, for us, we have a 1 day a week option, and that's usually where we try to push people to in season. But we don't have a specific, like, 30-minute speed session, come in, get out type of thing. That may be something we roll out next year, like a 2 day a week speed only membership. But right now we don't have that. But we are going to offer, like, we can only do speed training on Fridays, like max velocity testing on Fridays right now, because we use the parking lot. And so we have a ton of kids come on Friday. So we're shifting that to have a session that's just specific to like max velocity work for that day. And I think that's already been kind of in communication with our clients. Like we have, like Darren said, that ongoing communication with athletes of, if they're getting their strength work in and then they've got practice, like they're not getting that speed dose. And so the kids know, like, this is the day I want to come because this is what I know I need. Sometimes kids will come in and they're beat up and maybe they can't do it. And so we have to pivot a little bit. But that's really the only change for us is more of a conversation, not necessarily a specific offer.
Got it. That's even more simple. I mean, the fact that you're having success without needing to have that specific offering is even better, right? Darren, what about you guys?
We're exactly the same. So our membership set up so athletes can choose 1 to 4 times a week, throughout the month, like how many times they come in a week. And that's where we try to do 1 or 2. And then those ones that are 1, we are just hitting that top speed goal, because as many coaches know, that central nervous system, that top speed is the first trait that's going to drop away. And also, like you said, there's strength conditioning programs that at the high schools that they will kick up around this time, and they have some required stuff. So just filling the buckets that they're not getting at the school all the time. We'll change the workout based on what they did at the high school that day or the day before. But just giving them that option, like that 1 time a week, like Alex said, I hate having like a ton of different offerings sometimes, just because it can cause some confusion or pull kids away from what they really need, because they're like, well, I just want to do speed. But you might have some athletes that really are missing on that strength bucket, or they're not in a program at school and the speed's just sexy, so they're going to want to move over to that class. So yeah, we just try to lower the frequency, have the same options, and just talk to them about dropping down a couple sessions a week during the season.
Yeah, 100%. And Darren, I want to go back to something you were speaking on a moment ago, which is, I do feel like, again, I'm talking to performance business owners all day, every day. And it's like, I can put them in 2 buckets. It's like performance businesses that have a very cohesive relationship with the team sport coaches of the athletes they're training. And then performance business owners who really feel like they have a contentious relationship, like they're in competition with these team sport coaches. And I know that that's a struggle for a lot of performance business owners, is that they really feel like they're competing with those coaches, right? For the attention of the athlete. And I know you've done a really good job at HansenAthletics of creating those relationships with coaches so that it's a reinforcing relationship, right? It's not something that a coach is saying, hey, don't go train with that guy when you're training with me, or like they're actually reinforcing those athletes coming to train with you. So talk through a little bit, like, how did you create those relationships? Because I think that that's a really powerful skill that a lot of performance business owners need to master.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could tell you it was easy. It takes a lot of time and trust to build with them. And sometimes that's tough because sport coaches will flip over pretty quickly. Like one of our high school girls soccer teams has had a new coach every year for the last 3 years. So, and it has to be the right individual, right? There'll be coaches there's coaches in our town that we get along really well with, and we've had the same conversations with other coaches and they're not open to it. So it's just getting the relationships at the right time with the right individual that's in place. And I would say like 100% of the time, it's you extending that hand, you reaching out, you kind of putting them in a place of power, being like, hey, we have some athletes coming to your gym. Obviously, you're number one because you're the sport. What can we do, or what are you noticing with your athletes that we can help improve? And some of them even have like, I'm like, okay, what's the volume of your practices? Are there days you're going easier, harder? And we're going to try to fit in what we're doing to align with what you're doing. So kind of just stroking their ego and letting them know that you're here to help and you're not here to necessarily like negatively compete with what they're doing.
That's so spot on. Alex, I want to let you chime in with anything you would add to that or any insight there, but then I want to just emphasize how important it is.
Yeah, I would completely agree. It's been the same for us, and it takes time. Like that's the other thing; it does take a little bit of time, and just getting out into the community. Like I've met coaches just by going to games and having conversations with them. I've done it through reaching out to them. Like I've talked to 2 coaches on the phone the past week, like soccer coaches, just talking about supporting their athletes, and they understand because I've said the same thing. Is like what you guys are doing comes first, and we're here to help to supplement whatever else is going on. And that just the communication aspect of that is just really big, but it does take time, especially like if you work with a lot of one sport, it's a little bit easier because you're kind of known more. Like we're pretty known in like the soccer community, so it's a little bit easier to build those relationships for us. But yeah, it just takes time and reaching out, like Darren said.
Yeah, like I said, I want to just emphasize how important that is. It's like I was actually just talking with a performance business owner last week, and they were talking about how difficult it's been with coaches in their area, and that they're training these athletes, but their coaches at their school are telling them don't train with them while you're in season with me, and that they just don't feel like they've been able to build those relationships. And I asked this performance business owner, like, what does your communication look like? Like, just be real with yourself for a second. Have you ever actually reached out to that coach and said, hey, what would you like me to be doing with these athletes if they're in my facility, right? Like, how can I really help you guys? And I think credit to this performance business owner, they were really honest with themselves in the moment, and they were kind of like, yeah, that's not actually the approach that we've taken. We've taken the approach of trying to show how much we know and how much, and reached out and led with the deficiencies that we're noticing in these athletes, right? As opposed to reaching out and saying, hey, how can we help? What would you, just because you ask the coach of the school, hey, what would you like us to be doing with those athletes, doesn't mean that you have to do that, right? But it does start to build the relationship and show that you want their input and you want their feedback. And that's going to, earn you the ability to influence them, if you disagree on what your focus should be with these athletes, right? And so I think leading with the way that both of you have laid out that you should lead those conversations, I think is a really simple and really applicable thing that coaches can take away, or performance business owners can take away and say like, all right, cool, we're just having these conversations the wrong way. And you're absolutely right, Darren. Like there are going to be some coaches that just aren't open to that, but I think setting yourself up for success there is really important.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Darren.
I wanted to add the mindset shift. I think in the performance business and strength conditioning, you can definitely, you learn things, you're pretty knowledgeable in a certain space, and you feel like, these sport coaches don't really understand. But I think it's always important to lead with, what's best for the athlete. Like, and that allows me, for me personally, to drop my ego a little bit, is like, it's all about this kid here right in front of me. And even if it is something that I don't want to do, like I don't want to reach out to their coach that I know is doing, you know, a ton of conditioning work in the middle of the week between soccer games, and it's absolutely stupid. But it's like it's about this athlete. So, how what's the best way we can serve this athlete? And it's a lot of times going to point towards some uncomfortable or putting yourself seemingly at will of what the sport coach wants. But it's not about you. It's about, those kids that walk in your door. And I think when you adopt that mindset, the kids know it, the parents can see it, and you just build that love, that love inside your gym where, no matter what, that kid's going to find a way to get back in there for the season, or they're going to be back for sure as soon as things slow down. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
I would just add to that, like even conversations with your kid, your athletes, like Darren mentioned, they're doing something silly during the week, being very careful about how you have those conversations with the athlete, because it's really easy to like react and be like, oh my gosh, that's so dumb, right? Why are you doing that? You need to make sure that you don't sow seeds of disrespect in the athlete to their sport coach, and like badmouth them. You just kind of have to hold your tongue a little bit and maybe find another time to add some education, or say, okay, well, cool, this is what we need to add because you're not getting it, instead of creating this like kind of pool of negativity around that sport coach.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it goes back to that idea that like there's that saying, I can't think of exactly what it is, but it's like the enemy of perfect is good enough, right? But I also think that the enemy of perfection is or the enemy of progress is perfection, right? In the sense that it's like, oh, it's not perfect. It's not exactly how I'd want it to be. So we're just not going to do anything. Like I know that I'm never going to be able to work with this team sport coach to make it perfect, right? Have that team sport coach doing exactly what I would want them to be doing with the athletes so that I can reinforce that with what I'm doing with them in my facility and get this athlete the absolute most ideal perfect outcome. And because I know I'm not ever going to be able to get there with this coach, like we're just not going to do anything. And so sometimes I think that the enemy of making progress can be, well, I know I'm not ever going to be able to make it perfect, right? But I think shifting that mindset to like, well, how could we make it better, right? How could we improve what this athlete is doing, even if I know that team sport coach is still going to be doing crazy stuff, right? It's like, how do we do what we can? How do we make it 5 percentage points better than what they would have gotten otherwise, right? Because that way we're putting the athlete first, and we're really thinking about the athlete, right? Okay, so I want to shift to something else real quick here, and again, to the attendees, if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. But Alex, you talked about going to games to build those relationships, and I think it seems really simple, like just go to the game. But I think there's more and less effective ways to do that, right? And more and less effective ways to kind of strategize that and how to show up and be intentional about the conversations that you're going to have while you're there. And so maybe talk to me a little bit about, because I found in the past that like sometimes as a performance coach, you can go to a game to try to build those relationships, and it kind of just ends up being, it can be a waste of time if you're not really intentional about what you're trying to accomplish by doing that. And so maybe just talk to me a little bit about like, what is your strategy when you're going to that game and you're trying to build those relationships?
Yeah, for sure. And it can be hard if you're like a one-man show, which I know a lot of performance gyms are. We've been doing it since the beginning just because I knew it was going to be important. So setting your schedule, like just to kind of attack this on the front end, is like trying to find a schedule where even if it's like you can only go to like late games, you can only go on Saturday, like not counting out and just saying, well, I can't do it because I'm too busy, because it is really important, like not only for your business, but just for the kids, because it builds that level of trust. Like they know you care about them if you're going to show up at a 7 o'clock game, right? Or a Saturday morning game. And they always get really excited about it. And I think from an intentionality perspective, there's two ways I look at it. One is the actual showing up at the game and how we look at that. And then the other one is like choosing certain games that you go to. Going to the games, I always try to look for parents of athletes that we know are playing. And usually we'll pick games that are like kids are on both teams. So then it's like you're kind of picking out the parents in the crowd just to at least say hello. And I'm not an outgoing person, so like I have to like really make myself like put myself out there, right? And like, look, do I know this parent? Cool. People will yell at you sometimes, like, oh hey, that's Coach Alex, whatever. And we'll go try to talk to the parents. I usually try to sit with a parent instead of like sitting by myself, right? And so just being very intentional about when you're at that game, having conversations, ask how the athletes are doing. Even when you're watching the game, like don't be looking at your phone, like pay attention to what's going on. Things like that are important. I try to wear like branding. If any of our other coaches go, it's the same thing. Um, as far as picking games that we go to, we like to go to games kind of on the front end of the season and then on the back end of the season because we want to try to stay like top of mind with them. So as soon as they kind of finish up, or maybe they're not sure if they're going to go on pause or whatever yet, you try to go to their games and encourage them. And then late season, like I think between our team, we've been to like 8 or 9 events in the past week. And that's because a lot of these seasons are wrapping up. We want to see the kids. And so we're trying to really prioritize it. And a lot of times the kids and parents are like, oh, I can't wait to get back in, blah, 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 that sort of thing. We might not get to go to every single athlete's game like this season, but maybe those are the kids we prioritize next season. We actually have, like I'm looking at it right now, we have a whiteboard full of athletes who are either on, they're in season or they're on like membership pause. And so we try to plan out from August to October, like which games we're going to try to hit, which does take time because you got to go pull up all their schedules and everything. So I think planning on the front end, which games you're going to try to attend helps make sure you get there.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't even think about this before I asked, but are you more heavily prioritizing going to the games of kids that are currently on pause with you, or are you prioritizing more going to the games of kids that are still training with you in the season?
I would say it's more kids that we know are like going to be more likely to be long-term athletes. Like if we have somebody that trained with us for like a month and a half and like, maybe we don't think they're going to come back. Like I'm probably going to prioritize the athlete who's been with us a little bit longer, right, and go to their game. But I mean, it's kind of a mix as far as that goes. We also try to send like I have a coach that works with a lot of middle school. So I try to send her the middle school games because she like knows those kids a little bit better. So even with like the coach that we send to the games, I think that also should be a little bit intentional as well.
Yeah, 100%. Darren, is this something that you guys are doing a lot of as well?
Yeah, we've been doing this since the beginning. We're to the point now where, like Alex said, it's virtually impossible to hit every game or, so we front end, back end, just like her. A couple things we look for, I'd add to that is, I'll sit with parents sometimes, but a lot of times if I have athletes on both sides, I'll try to, this sounds crazy, but I'll try to pick a spot that's very visible to not only the athletes, but to the parents. And so I'll try to sit somewhere where sometimes I'll sit on the opposite side by the student section, like in between the student sections, so that parents can like see me across the way there. And then number two is I usually almost linger after to when the athletes come out of the locker room, because that's honestly where I think most progress is made, is because parents are usually waiting there for their athlete. You're waiting there for the athlete. And then the athlete loves to see you, comes up, gives you high five, talk to you for a minute. And then all the parents, like you've basically just like shuffle or like eliminated everyone else that's just there to watch that you don't know. And now it's just the athletes and their parents and you. So that's the most pivotal time. Like sometimes I'll even go at halftime and then just stay till the end of the game and whatnot. So those would be the two things I'd add to that. But then everything else Alex said is on point.
Yeah, I love that. Hang out after the game, so you make sure that you get that FaceTime with the parent and the athlete. I think that's huge. Okay, cool, guys. So I want to dive into one more thing here, and then if there's no questions, we'll wrap things up. But I just wanted to get an idea because I think this is really tangible of like how your revenue streams change from in the summer to in the school year. Like, is your in season training being driven heavily through like team training contracts, or is it more just retaining individual athletes or athletes that aren't in season when the big sports are in season? Like, how do your actual like revenue streams shift throughout the year? And Darren, I think I'll kick that to you first.
Yeah. So summer's our biggest team training time. And now we are getting to the point where we have some other sports in the winter. And but fall is actually our slowest. So winter is one of our busiest. Like I think last winter we actually beat the summer before. So I just know that fall just seems to be the most sport heavy, where they have a lot of games. You got a lot of different sports going on at once. So in terms of that, like we are filling buckets wherever we can. Like right now, let's say, so we're in the fall right now. What's carrying us is, we have some in-season kids, but we have a lot of kids that do the non-traditional sports that train with us year round. So they're still in. And then we're trying to acquire, athletes that, I mean, we have a pretty decent influx now. And I know, come winter, like most of our kids will come back. And now we've already added, 20, 30 new clients during the fall. So it's just like piecing it together as much as you can. Um, I'm reactivating some during the season right now. Like I've been able to have some conversations and get some athletes reactivated. It's just like a combination of like where can I grab them at the time, and like I said, fall is historically the worst, so that's probably where I'm hustling the most on, like talking to people that are paused and trying to find those athletes that need help. Like as soon as like middle school tryouts finished, I reached out. I got a message from the coach on who didn't make the team and who did make the team for the middle school. So I reached out to all the girls that didn't make the team and said, hey, if you're ready to get in some work and let's make the team next year, kind of thing. And we were able to grab like 3 volleyball girls from that list. And yeah, it's just like wherever you can scrap and find people for us.
Man, I love that. Just shifting those focuses throughout the year. Like, where is the lowest hanging fruit that I can go
Mhm.
get? And I just want to emphasize how good of a job you've done of like focusing on those traditionally more underserviced sports, right? That
Yeah.
aren't managed to training. And it's like, this is something that like I've hit on for a long time is everybody wants that football team training contract. Everybody wants that, but it's like you're kind of doing yourself a disservice because you're going after the thing that everybody wants. Like you're going after the highest demand thing. That's where the most competition is, right? Those are the athletes that are getting the biggest budget at the school, that are getting in the weight room the most. Like arguably they're the athletes that need your training the least, right? And that everybody is also going after. So high demand, low supply, right? It's just like simple law of economics. And I think that the performance businesses that open themselves up to like, well, how do we go get a lacrosse team training contract? How do we go, whatever the not big sports are in your area are actually typically the easier athletes to acquire and the easier team training contracts specifically to go acquire, because you think the reason like, oh, well, they're not doing it because they don't need it. But it's like, you'd be amazed how many of these team coaches you reach out to and they're like, man, finally somebody reached out to us and offered
Yeah.
help. Don't get that attention, right? We don't get it through the school. We don't get it through the boosters, whatever. And so, yeah, I think you guys have done a really good job of that. And I think that that's been a big part of the success that you've had, it sounds like. So,
Yeah. And I'll add to that real quick. Like I found a ton of joy in that because with those main sport, athletes, they have everybody, like you said, fighting for us. So sometimes I think they take it a little bit for granted. And man, the joy, like some of these other odd sports that don't get the opportunity as much just because the parents aren't aware that it can actually help them out, like a swimmer, whatever. Um, or they just don't have anybody fighting for them. Like they love being in here and they love getting after it and they love the opportunity. So, that's been really enjoyable to actually work with a lot of these odd sports because it wasn't something that necessarily just like popped in my mind. It's just like at first I had a cheerleading team reach out, got another team, and I'm like, man, they loved it so much, and I'm like, and they're good athletes. I'm like, where are these pockets of sports that people aren't being serviced and that we can help out? I also wanted to add one more thing to go into the games. I forgot to mention was that's a great time to scout out new athletes. Like when I see athletes, particularly, I look for the athletes that aren't playing or the athletes that are really really good that aren't coming in yet, and I start to actually reach out. Like the other day I reached out to on Facebook to one of the quarterbacks in town's parents that just transferred here, and he's playing really well. People are, he's new, and I'm gonna land that kid. So right after football season he comes in, and I promise you, like if you can land those high performing athletes and get them bought in, that's going to bring in 4 or 5 other athletes that want to perform like that athlete. So I'm also scouting, right? So while I'm out there at the games.
yeah, being real, it's like I just love the level of intentionality that both Darren and Alex you have and that you've expressed on this call about seeking out those opportunities, right? As opposed to just waiting for them to come to you. And so, Alex, I'm going to let you chime in here, but this actually ties in nicely to a question that Frederick dropped in the chat. He said, and it's a big question, but I think it ties in nicely to this topic, Darren, that you just hit on, which is what is your go-to verbiage when a parent comes up and asks you about how you can help them and their athlete? And so, Alex, I'm going to put you on the spot to give us your elevator pitch for APG.
Yeah, I mean, I usually lead with, well, what are your goals for the athlete? Like, what are you looking to improve in their performance? And then I hit through like what our gym, what we work on in our gym, what we're trying to accomplish, and explain how what we do can fit that need. And then try to field just any questions that they have. I try to keep it pretty just authentic. Like I don't have a script per se. It's usually based on if it's a volleyball player and they tell me that they want to jump higher, that always leads to the conversation of talking about how max speed training can help with their vertical jump and how that's what we work on. And we work with a lot of volleyball girls and that sort of thing. So it really just depends on the direction the parent is wanting with how I make the pitch, if that makes sense. And then we try to get contact info. So it's like, okay, well, we'll set up a call with you and we'll talk through this in more detail.
Yeah, I like it. I think that that's the way the conversation should start. Is like, well, not to be evasive, right? But it's like, well, what does your athlete need, right? Okay, cool. We got a couple more questions in the chat here, so we'll tackle those. One of the attendees asked, what communication / social media tool do you use the most to keep in touch with athletes, parents, team sport coaches? What's been the most beneficial or like effective line of communication with athletes and parents? Like, are you guys mostly using social media? Or are you mostly using email, text? Like, how are you keeping in touch with athletes and their parents?
Yeah, I mean, we try to do it all. I mean, Instagram and Facebook mostly, and then we have groups built in. Like we have a group built on Instagram and Facebook where parents can join. We use our CRM push press to message and text because we can, separate our people based on who's active, who's paused, who's canceled. I send out a newsletter every month. We do podcasts. There's updates, all kinds of things. So I leverage all of them. I would say like a lot of success on continued communication through having like a good CRM and way to contact your clients through that, and just continually having conversations and sending out a newsletter. And then Facebook is probably stronger in my area for conversation with parents over Instagram. So those are the different ways I leverage it. But what I learned back in the day was 7 touch points. I try to get a hold of our parents between 7 to 10 times every month, which can seem like a lot, but you'd be surprised at how many respond to that like 6th time and they don't mention anything about the first 6 times or like 5 times, right? So just staying relevant and staying top of mind through whatever means you can.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. It's been my experience as well, is that when it just comes to sales, but also like if you're working a lead, but also keeping an existing client engaged, it's like the volume just needs, whatever you think the volume needs to be, it needs to be at least twice that, right? It's like that,
Yeah.
That rule of gathering firewood. It's like, get as much as you think you need to get you through the night and then get 5 times more, right? It's like,
Yep.
it just, people's bandwidth is stretched, right? So I think your point of like, use all the mediums, text them, email them, put updates on social media, because hitting them in multiple ways, right? It's going to be different for everybody what they're paying attention to. Alex, what about you guys? What's your primary method of communicating with your customer base?
Yeah, very similar. We use a CRM through PushPress as well, so it gives us all the same details that Darren mentioned. And so a lot of times we'll shoot text out like, "Hey, how's so and so doing?" So they're getting the text message, and then we do send out emails as well on updates. And then we use Instagram, Facebook some, but we definitely use Instagram more. And I try to intentionally do like 2 things on Instagram. One is just highlighting the kids and kind of create this like FOMO for the kids who aren't in the gym, like to make them want to come back. I try to highlight like somebody hit an in-season speed PR, so I'm going to try to highlight that specifically, and then pushing out some education through that as well.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, cool. We've got one more question here, and then we'll wrap things up. Cameron asks, how do you go about scheduling your group training times in season? Do you have groups as late as 8 p.m. To get the in-season athletes in? I think this is a really good logistics question. Is like, does your schedule, how do you shift the schedule, or what do your group training schedules look like? Alex, let's start with you there.
Yeah, we have 6 p.m. is our latest class time, and it's intentionally on a Monday night because a lot of our kids have like Tuesday, Thursday game schedule. So we know they're probably not going to want to come in on a Wednesday when they are between games. And so we get more of those kids like Monday and Friday. A lot of kids don't have practices on Friday. So like our 4 p.m. on Friday is their biggest class of the week, probably for my high school kids. We let it get a little bit bigger than maybe our other groups, but yeah, we just really just that 6 p.m. because I feel like for us, Darren might be different. He has a little bit more class times than we do. I don't get a ton that want to come in like late.
Darren?
Yeah, I mean, we surprisingly crush it in the morning. So we do morning. Our latest class time is 6:30 to 7:30. Our sports, like some of my soccer girls, practice not right after school. They practice like at 6:30 p.m. So we have offerings all the way from, well, on Mondays they have early release, so we start at 3, and then all the other days we start at 4. But we have offerings every 30 minutes from 4 all the way to 6:30. And we have multiple coaches at each one of those slots. So we have plenty of options for athletes to get in. We actually cut out like the 5:30 slot just because it's such an odd one. It's like either people are, they have to practice and they're not going to make it in time, or they practice later. So it's like they either come before or after. And that's it. We've tried a little bit later. It's tough to ask the kids to come in at like 7:30 p.m., be done at 8:30, and they had practice probably right before that, and then they got to do their homework and all of that stuff. So always got to keep in mind, like, these athletes need to recover and they need to sleep and they still have school. So we try not to like get too crazy late with them. And I always have conversations about, like, hey, if you were going to stay up late and do your homework, like, go to bed on time and wake up early and do your homework in the morning. Which is a hard sell, but I've got some kids doing that and they love it. So, yeah, that'd be the latest I'd go. But just depends. Like, if you're doing more one-on-ones, or you have certain kids that want that time and you want to provide it, do it, but also keep your own sanity and health in mind. Like, I remember when I first started and I was coaching, 6 till 8:30, 6 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. I refuse to do that now. Right. So, you have to keep yourself in mind too. Like, especially if you have a family at home, you have relationships, you have hobbies, whatever. So,
Yeah, 100%. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. Well, we will close things up here. Hopefully, first of all, I appreciate both of you for coming in and just sharing your knowledge and your experience from out there on the front lines. Like, I would say if there's one thing to take away from this, and this is something that I always try to do with these webinars, is like, we're just trying to break a belief at the end of the day, right? Like, if we can break somebody's belief that, hey, here's two successful performance businesses that have figured out how do we keep some consistency throughout the year through these seasonal fluctuations, right? Again, you're always going to have busier months and slower months, but like, if an attendee leaves this call going, hey, it's possible, right? Like, I don't have to just succumb to the fact that it's like, I'm going to make all my money in the summer and then I'm going to make no money for the next 9 months, and then things are going to pick back up again, right? Or whatever that, obviously it's different in different marketplaces, but in terms of when those down and up times are. But it's like, the main takeaway is, hey, here's two performance businesses that are doing it, right? That have kind of cracked the code and figured out how to get things consistent throughout the year. And so if you took away that belief, good, that's a win. If you got some specific strategies and tactics on how to do that, that's even better. And we dropped both Darren and Alex's links to their Instagrams in the chat, so you can hit them up and ask them questions if you have them. They're great resources. I know that they'd be happy to share some more if you reached out to them. And last but not least, is always the shameless plug for Speed Labs. If you don't know what Speed Labs is, it's a community of performance businesses around the country. We just crossed 150 Speed Lab partners, which is really exciting because it feels like we just celebrated 100 a couple of months ago. So the community is continuing to grow, but we're a community of performance businesses that are the gold standard for speed training. And so if you're a performance business owner that wants to tap in and be that expert, that authority for speed training in your marketplace, and leverage speed as a vehicle to continue to impact more athletes and grow your business, then come talk to us about Speed Labs. And so that you don't just have to hear it from me, Darren, give me one reason why somebody should become a Speed Lab, and Alex, I'll have you do the same.
yeah, I was just going to add to that. Like, if you enjoy this conversation at all or found value in it, like, I would 100% recommend joining Speed Lab, even alone for the networking and the access to, some pretty high level coaches. I do calls with those Speed Lab gym owners all the time, and we have more direct conversations about how to do this in their environment and in their setting and with their athletes. So the value that comes from being a Speed Lab member, like, it outweighs, anything that I can really describe on this call in terms of connection and information available through others.
Yeah, 100%. Alex, what about you?
I would honestly say the same thing. Just being able to get access to other coaches and have these types of conversations one-on-one, and just have that support and encouragement, because a lot of coaches are not connecting with other coaches in the area because they're more like competition or whatever. So it's nice to be able to bounce ideas off of each other, whether it's programming, business stuff, marketing. I mean, we talk about all of it.
Yep, 100%. Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate everybody jumping on today. We'll send out the recording, and yeah, let's go get it. Let's go mitigate some seasonal fluctuation.
Let's go.
Bye.
Thanks, Dale.